Hello, fellow nerds, geeks, and supporters of indie pop culture creators. Aaron Nabus here, and thanks for tuning into the Hall H Show. On this episode, we welcome Jordan Hart, the creator, writer, and colorist of the comic book Ripple Effects. Published by Fanbase Press, Ripple Effects explores how a down on his luck aspiring writer struggles to find balance as he navigates daily life, social challenges, high healthcare costs, and the responsibilities and insecurities that manifest while having both a superpower and an invisible illness. In his case, it's type 1 diabetes. November is National Diabetes Month here in the United States, and the trade paperback version of Ripple Effects will also be released on November 15th, 2022. So I'm honored to have Jordan on this episode. Welcome to the Hall H Show, Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Aaron. This is exciting and a blast.
Now, we met a few years ago. I believe it was 2017 when you had a comic book out called Doppelganger. It's been a while, and it's a lot of things have happened since then. What you been up to?
Yeah, totally. Yes, a lot has happened. So after that, I took a small break from comics just to focus on a little bit of other types of writing. It had been about 3 straight years of indie comics. And as you know, indie comics are a grind, especially when you're working full time. So just took a little bit of a break. And then in 2019, I started working on Ripple Effects. It's an idea I've had for maybe 10 years, but just, never really had the drive to write it because it hit so close to home. Because I also have an incurable chronic illness. So George's story in Ripple Effects is essentially me just switched to type 1 diabetes. So I had been putting it off, and then I finally felt inspired to write it. And then I met with Barbara and Bryant Dillon, who have been longtime friends at Fanbase Press, and pitched it to them, and they really liked it. We were about to move forward, and then it must have been 3 weeks to not even maybe 2 weeks after that, lockdown started of the pandemic. So,
oh wow, that early in the process. Wow.
Yeah. So, and there was a pandemic originally in the, not a pandemic, but there was quarantine and like a small pandemic, a localized pandemic in the original story. So we spent, that first year of COVID repositioning Ripple Effects, rewriting it, trying, because I thought, and they agreed, like, people aren't going to want to read about pandemics and lockdown and everything after everything we're going through in real life. So we shifted, we pivoted, but the core story, the characters, everything stayed the same. And then, it started releasing earlier this year.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't mind, would you mind talking about the invisible illness that you suffer?
Yes. So I have thrombophilia, which is just the umbrella term for abnormal blood clots that form in the blood vessels. So for me, the blood clots form in my body, and then they travel through my heart and into my lungs, which become pulmonary embolisms. So I was diagnosed when I was 25, and they thought the blood clots were just a freak accident from working too much, sitting too long for like long periods without getting up and moving. So I was on blood thinners for a little bit over a year, went off once my heart had healed, went off them, and I had blood clots again in a couple of weeks. So it was then that I was diagnosed with thrombophilia, which is an incurable blood clotting disease. So I'm on blood thinners for the rest of my life to, stay alive, essentially, right? And I remember being in the hospital when they diagnosed me, and I was like shocked and trying to process. But while I was in there that week, I was thinking, well, that'd make a a pretty good story about an invincible superhero that nothing can hurt him except his own body. And that's where Ripple X came. And the reason I put it off for so long is because originally George, the main character, had thrombophilia, what I have, and it was just too hard to write. I just couldn't get in the right mind space, and it was just it was a lot of wounds that I was opening up,
Hmm.
and I just put it off. And then one of my best friends from my day job, who helped me adjust to life with the invisible illness, he has been a type 1 diabetic since he was 7. um, so I knew, if I could rely, his name is Perry. He's in the book as a consultant. So I knew if I could rely on Perry to help me nail the type 1 diabetes aspect of the story, that
Hmm.
I would just wrap in the, emotional and mental side of living with the invisible illness that I went through. So yeah, that's trying to make lemonade out of lemons, right?
Or lemon meringue pie, I guess, you know.
Yes, yeah, also very delicious, yes.
um, Now, how did you find Fanbase Press as a publisher?
So I originally met Fanbase Press when my first comic book, Terminarch, came out. The LA, LA is a huge city, but the indie comic scene is pretty small, right? So that was an indie book, and my editors introduced me to them, and I was on their podcast. And I go all the Southern California Comic Cons, and they're there too. So ever since that podcast in 2016, I would see them 3-4 times a year at shows and always talk, and became friends and was on their podcast about once or twice a year after that point. Um, and then when I wrote Ripple Effects, I just knew that they would be the best place to publish it, because their whole company platform is to publish stories that have an impact further than entertainment. And
Hmm.
that's what I feel like Ripple Effects is that it has an impact a little bit more than just pure comic entertainment. So and being friends with them, I knew they would do the story justice, and they would trust me, and they wouldn't over edit me or anything like that. So yeah, I pitched them. I didn't pitch anyone else. They're the only place I pitched to, which never happens, by the way.
Right.
It's always like a million pitches and a million rejections. But yeah, this was the one that yeah, it was one pitch, and they were in. So it was pretty cool.
Why did you think they were a good fit for you?
Just I think because I knew Barbara and Bryant,
Hmm.
like outside of being publishers, just as like human beings, and I knew they would be very empathetic to this story, but I also knew they're so well connected that they would help elevate the story. They would help get the story into libraries and make it more accessible. And that has always been my goal with this story is for anyone with an invisible or chronic illness to read and see themselves in the story, but also for loved ones that don't have an invisible illness, but they have a loved one that does. To kind of they're a part of the story too, and you know, and even people that don't have invisible illnesses, it shows like what life with that is. So and I knew they would be super supportive and know the right people, and they really did, and they really helped take this story to a whole new level, which I'm
Hmm.
really proud about.
Now, you found success with finding a good publisher for your book. Do you have any advice for other comic book creators when it comes to finding a publisher?
um yeah, be just persistence, not the right word, as in don't send the same editor 40 emails, but just like you're going to get rejected a lot.
Hmm.
There's so many people want to write comic books, and the market isn't that big. So it's just take it in stride. Don't take it too personally. Like, you could have a great idea, but they're developing a similar idea that you don't know about because it's not released yet, right? So they're gonna pass on that just because they don't want to have two similar books. So I would suggest, yeah, just keep on keeping on, keep on keeping on. Like I went through years of rejections before my first comic was published, and
Hmm.
yeah, just don't give up, and I feel like the best way is to meet the editors, meet the publishers, and the best way to do that, I think, is to go to a Comic Con,
Hmm.
especially if you go to like a bigger one, like C2E2 in Chicago or Emerald City in Seattle, anything here in SoCal, anything on the East Coast, Boston, New York. You're going to meet editors, and just go up to them and introduce yourself, and they're very responsive, and to be a comic book editor, you have to love comics, and to be a comic creator, you have to love comics. So you're going to get along. Like there's always that shared passion.
Right.
So yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, it looks like you had a busy schedule at San Diego Comic Con this past July promoting Ripple Effects. Can you sort of tell us a little bit about your experience there? I mean, having a big show there and for the first time in a couple of years must have been something.
Oh yeah, yeah. So Comic Con, I grew up in Milwaukee in the working class, right? So, all the comics, the Marvel comics I grew up reading as a kid, they'd have a San Diego Comic Con ad in there. If Comic Con was coming up, you see Toucan, and it's like you'd see Stan was going to be there, or Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee and Liefeld, and it's like I got to go there one day.
Right.
So I finally got there for the first time in my 20s as just an attendee, as a fan, and it was like heaven. It was just like I laugh. I tell my wife all the time, like, when I die, spread my ashes at Comic Con. Like, but do it, like, not over people or anything. But yeah, so that was like my nirvana is the San Diego Comic Con, and yeah, so to come in to start as a fan and an attendee, and then transition to being a professional there and having a pro badge, it's like a dream come true. Because I'm still a fan. Like, you'll see me at every con digging through old comics, right? Like 50-year-old comics, you'll see me at any con. If you ever want to run into me, I'm by the comic dealers if I'm not at a table. Um, so yeah, coming into COVID, that was probably what I missed the most, other than seeing my family in the Midwest, was Comic Con. It's just I mean, Aaron, I mean, everyone is just there in a good mood. They're with their people in their element. Like, it's just everyone's being themselves, and it's the best. So I mean, I put it on Instagram. In 2020, I still drove down from LA to the San Diego Convention Center on the weekend that would be Comic Con, just to see it, because I'm that obsessed. But then I saw Liefeld did the same thing the day after me, and I was like, oh, okay, that's not that weird. But no. So yes, sorry, this is long winded, but to come back to Comic Con this summer, 2022, it was awesome. I'm sure you felt it too. Like, everyone was just so pumped to be
Oh,
there. Like,
definitely.
I know there was like a lot of worry about, are people going to wear masks and all that stuff. It's like everyone just was so happy to be there. They didn't care. They're like, whatever, we're here. Comic Con's back. Let's just have fun. So to have such a big show with a panel, and then do signings at the Fanbase Press table was awesome. And to meet people, especially with chronic illnesses, that sought out Ripple Effects when I was there, and to read it and to buy it and to thank me for it. It was like the greatest feeling, in the world, to know that something, that you worked hard on is having an impact, right? So that was the best Comic-Con memory I've ever had,
That's
for sure.
incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great.
um, now, how long have you? You said you mentioned that you were working on the initial story. Well, I guess maybe pitching it at the beginning of the pandemic. But I mean, how long has this story been sort of percolating inside your head?
It would have been since November 2012, when I was
Wow.
hospitalized the second
Mm.
time with blood clots in my lungs. Yeah, so that's where the story idea, first hit me. But I didn't really think about it for the next year, because the next year was 3 months of bed rest. There was just a lot of recovery. So I wasn't really thinking about that, and then it kind of came back to the surface after my first comic book came out, because this is my first superhero story. Even though I grew up on superheroes, I usually write sci-fi and horror stories. So I knew that one day when I was ready to get there and I felt like I was a good enough writer to do a superhero story that I would do it. So yeah, so the idea came in 2012, but then it was percolating like early 2017. That's when,
Mm.
when it started developing.
Is
Um,
there an event that sort of maybe set off that spark to put you on that path to get it done with more urgency?
um, yeah. I have a group. I had a group of friends. Have a group of friends in LA that are screenwriters, and they were, talking about superhero ideas. And I just told them, they're friends, so they knew about my illness, and I told them the idea about ripple effects, and I was like, yeah, but I don't know if people, would anyone would want to publish that or whatever. And like they kind of just like all stared at me, and I just knew. And they're like, "What are you waiting for? Write this." You know what I mean? So I have to give credit to them for they were the first people I really told about the story, other than my wife. And
Hmm.
she supports everything. So
That's good.
yeah, do it. So it's like but to hear it from other writers, right, that they were like, what are you waiting for, like you have to do this. That's what really pushed it through, and that was in fall 2019. So that's when I really like created George, created the world, knew it was going to be in Long Beach. That's when I really started digging in.
Speaking of George, your main protagonist, you mentioned that he was based off of somebody. I think your friend Perry, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, and would you mind telling us a little bit more about the other main characters in Ripple Effects?
Yeah, so aside from George, who's the protagonist, the kind of superman of the world of Ripple Effects is Kristen Gutierrez, who goes by the name Salvadora. And I knew I wanted to create like the overarching Superman type character for this story that really was going to be there to push George to become a superhero, because just he was too insecure and nervous to do it, and that's covered a lot in the story. So
Hmm.
I knew I needed her, and then I really wanted to have a character that was kind of like the anti-hero, right, where that character could be, he's doing bad things, but he's doing them for a good thing. So it's like, where do those are the characters I love the most, the
Like
great characters.
the
So
Robin Hood
yeah,
type
yes,
character.
totally, the Robin Hood. So that I made her brother, Kristen Salvador's brother, Juan. I made that Robin Hood type character, and he wants George to join his, crusade or cause, because he feels that George knows about, the challenges and the social inequity, that he's trying to fight in battle. And George, through medical bills and everything, knows that better than anyone. So those are kind of like the three primary characters. And then, yeah, just built out his team, gave him his little X-Men crew, his little Avengers crew. So,
Yeah,
uh,
you mentioned Rob Liefeld earlier, and I was laughing a little bit because one of your characters has a bunch of pouches, so that was kind of funny.
correct. Yeah, yeah. So that one of the characters, Lewis, his name is Jumptron because he can jump 200 feet in the air, and he's just got a ton of patches. And I had to do that as a comic fan, right? Because like everyone makes fun of Liefeld in the '90s for having all these patches, but like if you think about it, if you were a vigilante, like wouldn't you want a ton of pockets for things? Like I
Sure.
would. Like I'd want pockets for a flashlight and for a cell phone,
At, le-
and
at least a fanny pack,
yeah, exactly. It's like you need to carry stuff. So it's like that is how I wanted to say that in the story, that like, yeah, like okay, maybe they went a little overboard on the pouches, but you still would need them in theory if you're out there on your own.
Hmm.
So yeah, that
I mean,
was that
Batman
was
has a utility belt that holds a bunch of stuff, so
exactly. Exactly. Batman has the utility belt. Like all the X-Men used to have like, a thin utility belt. Well, not all of them, but I mean, Storm or Rogue and Gambit both had jackets, so they could put stuff there. And
hmm.
yeah, but yeah, so that was a blast. Really, kind of growing up, such a huge fan of the X Men, right? That like defining my childhood with the X Men, to kind of create my own squad was really a lot of fun.
Who's on the creative team, and how did you find them?
Yeah. So the penciler and inker, the artist is Bruno Chirolo, and Fanbase found him. I believe he reached out to Fanbase pre Ripple Effects. So they had him with a couple of other artists. In database or folder that we could pick through. So with this being a heavier story, we talked to a lot of really phenomenal artists, but the story is a little heavy. So I knew I wanted the art to be a little lighter, and I think Bruno's style was perfect for that. It's realistic, but very thin lines. Not There's no inking. There's not no cross hatching. It just opens it up more. Especially being set in Los Angeles, right? I really wanted to color it all as vibrant as possible. So if you get a really inky artist, it's hard to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
And
really easy to read.
yeah, yeah, thank you, man. So yeah, like in my opinion, how you get tone for a scene in a comic is through color, right? Like that's
Hmm.
what controls everything. So knowing all the tones I needed for different scenes and just how bright Los Angeles and California is, yeah, I just needed to pull back the inks. So Bruno was great. And then Shane Kadlacek was the color flatter, which saves me so much time when I'm trying to write and design everything and do all the logos and stuff. So if for those of you listening that aren't sure about a color flatter, basically what they go into the inked final page from the artist and they just fill in every single shape and item on that page. And then what I do is I come in and just select those shapes and just recolor them and change the color palettes and everything. So
Hmm.
Shane was awesome. And then, of course, bringing it home with Oceano Radsford, who lettered the book and just has such a cool style. And he does most of Fanbase's books. So Barbara and Bryant kind of like brought him up and like he could probably be really good. And I saw his work. And I was like, oh yeah, he'd be phenomenal. It just lettering is one of those things that I don't know, it's kind of like the offensive lineman in football, right? Like you only notice a lineman when they mess up and give up a quarterback sack or whatever. Like
Yeah, that's a good point.
yeah, that's what lettering is. Like great lettering, you don't really notice, but if the lettering is subpar, it stands out. So yeah, having him there was great. And then one of my closest friends, Justin Harder, was the cover artist. And he's a phenomenal artist that usually is in the movie and TV realm. So he did the end titles for Thor: Dark World, Deadpool, My Little Pony, Book of Life, and then just other stuff that you have seen a million times that you wouldn't know that he did. So like the Weekend Update for Saturday Night Live, their intro sequence, and
Oh
Jimmy
wow.
Dean, and yeah, so he's a phenomenal illustrator in his own right. So, and he's a lifelong comics fan like myself, and that's how we became friends. I met him at WonderCon, so I was like, hey, what do you think? Would you do covers? I like begged him. And of course he was more than willing, and he just did a fantastic job. I just love all the covers he did.
Yeah, I don't think beginning and end title movie credits get enough respect.
I would agree. I fully agree with that. I mean, it's a whole art form,
Hmm.
like you said, and some schools are beginning to teach it as a semester class, and I think they should. It is, like you said, a true art form, and
Yeah,
you
I
know,
mean, I've told this in past interviews that well, I'm like you, I'm a graphic designer, and I think when I watched West Side Story for the first time when I was a kid, even though I didn't know
yep,
what graphic design was, I was
yep,
totally enamored by the beginning and end title credits that Saul Bass created for that movie. So,
totally. I I agree. It's like Saul Bass, one of the best, right?
hmm,
It's like
yeah,
you look at the stuff he did, especially back then, you're like, holy, like this holds today. Like this,
right,
this could work today, what he did way back then.
yeah.
So no, I totally agree. It's a really underrated air space, but yeah, it's awesome when someone nails it.
Hmm. From start to finish, were there any challenges that you had difficulty resolving? And if so, what were they and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so I guess yeah, the biggest challenge was really COVID in real life,
Mm,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
not to spoil the story, but there is uh, a localized illness that takes out a whole block of a Los Angeles neighborhood, and really positioning in a way that didn't pull people out of the story and back into our world. That was my biggest concern. Like
Oh, interesting.
even wearing PPE suits, wearing medical outfits, talking about like the side effects, right, of what this illness is doing, So that was the biggest challenge that I really needed to be that was just it was the biggest challenge,
Hmm.
because before it was, yeah, it was like an illness that was throughout Los Angeles, right? So it was not just a neighborhood, it was much bigger in scale. People were getting really ill. No one was dying, but people were getting ill. There was a lockdown. I was like, oh, I cannot do that anymore. So, but like when you're writing, it's all a house of cards, right? You
Hmm.
change one thing, you got to change a lot of stuff, right? And you know, so that was the biggest challenge for sure, getting that out there. And then
Well,
luckily,
I think you handled it well because the
thank you.
way, well, I don't want to ruin it for anybody who's going to be reading it soon, but yeah, I mean, it got resolved. Well, the reason why that happened, I think, was a pretty good solution.
Thank you. And honestly, like as always, like the what came out I think is way better and stronger than what I had originally anyways,
Hmm.
and that's so yeah, that was the big challenge. And then I mean, I guess just like out of the story wise, it was just really the uncertainty of working on a comic and not knowing like what it was like. Would there be cons for this to be at? Would so many comic stores were closing during COVID and going out of business, and it's just like it was just tough, like that uncertainty of, is this book going to get out there, but again, knock on wood, everything turned out great.
Hmm. Speaking of powers, like, can you maybe cover George's power set and how it interplays with his invisible illness?
Yeah. So I knew I wanted George to be invincible, but I wanted to do it in a more interesting way than just like the classic bullets bouncing off the skin and like ting ting ting, like the
Hmm.
person walking through a onslaught of bullets. So I thought it would be cool if, instead of saying he was invincible, giving him a power that was called damage negation. And what the idea is there is that when anything hits him, or any like blunt trauma or anything hits his skin absorbs it and then diffuses that energy by rippling over his skin. So again, I guess that was another challenge, is figuring out how to show that in a comic, right? Like
Hmm.
that would look so great on in film or TV where you have CGI in motion, but like comics being still images, that was a challenge, but Bruno nailed it. But yeah, so I thought that would be something cool, that instead of he's just like unpierceable bulletproof, like let's show what happens to his body and how his power works when he gets shot or when he falls or burns himself or anything. So um that being the idea is that nothing can get through his skin. So being a type 1 diabetic, the problem is of course getting blood work, right? How can you get blood work if nothing can get through your skin? So I just worked in the wrinkle that George is the only person that could can get through his power because his body recognizes it's its own body, right? So it's like it recognizes him, so he does his blood work, and
Hmm.
he can handle all that stuff. And that becomes a very big part of the story, right? That like he's the only one that can get through his invincibility, but what happens if you need to and he can't? So not to spoil anything, but yeah, so that was the kind of wrinkle that I tried to work in.
I guess it's sort of similar to how Cyclops is immune to his own optic blasts, right?
Correct, exactly. So same thing.
That's cool. Yeah. Now, um, how do you, going back to conventions and how you're going to go back and you know promote ripple effects. If you're at a comic convention, how would you sort of describe ripple effects to the people walking by your table?
Oh yeah, great. So basically what I try to say is that it's a grounded real life story. Like it's a superhero story, but he's not in the costume that much. It's more about the life of having superpowers and being invisibly ill. So the quick like one sentence pitch I say is it's like Superman being immune, or I'm sorry, Superman being susceptible to kryptonite, but in this story, it's George susceptible to his own body. So his type 1 diabetes is his kryptonite,
Hmm.
and that's how I try to position it that way.
Speaking of kryptonite, I guess we'll transition to the thunder round, which is our sort of round of random questions. What's your kryptonite?
My kryptonite,
Yeah.
chocolate. I don't know. I eat way too much chocolate, uh, and yeah, it is my complete weakness. Um, uh, I really should not eat as much chocolate as I do, but like if I eat dinner and I don't have like a piece of chocolate after it within a half hour, like I start like getting the itch. Like
Uh,
oh man, I got to run to the store real quick and get it. So yeah, I would say chocolate, and then other than that, if you're going bigger picture than that, it would be just that anyone will tell you my work ethic is a little bonkers. I definitely work too much, but if you want to do indie comics at the scale and amount that I do, like you have to you have to grind. So you gotta grind
right.
multiple jobs.
Definitely. I feel you. Even though I don't make comic books, maybe one day I will. But I was freelancing for the past 2.5 years as a freelance graphic designer, and it was a grind, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the freelance life alone just to get new work, like that's it's just so much back end of like reaching out to people, making sure your website's up to date, like yeah, it's you almost spend more time trying to drum up work than you do doing the work sometimes. That's how I feel at least. So
Right. Uh, since we're on the subject of graphic design, how did you find graphic design?
Um, so I loved art. My original dream was to be a comic book artist. My whole childhood, that's what I thought I would do. Um, and then I got to high school and I got into an AP art program. I started painting a lot, and I was doing a lot of painting and winning this award for painting. Um, and I thought that's what I would, go to college, go to art school for. But I'm from a blue collar family. I would be the first person from my family to go to college, and I just didn't see how I could get out of that situation as a painter in the Midwest.
Hmm.
So my older cousin is a graphic designer, and I just went over to her house one day, my senior year of high school, and she was showing me Photoshop, Illustrator, all these programs, and then I went and visited her at work once too, and I was like, wow, this seems like a pretty cool job. Where because she was a great painter too, my cousin, and she loved being a designer, and yeah, it just seemed like the right move for me, knowing that I could still paint at night, still paint on the side. I thought, getting into graphic design was just something really fun, because I loved computers, so it was a nice combination of art and computer.
Hmm. And we talked a little bit about Saul Bass earlier. Are there any other graphic designers that you admire?
Yeah, so love Saul Bass. He's the three color palettes that he worked with, legendary. I do, and it's kind of crazy that he is who he is now. But like when I was young, starting out of college, I loved Shepard Fairey.
Yeah.
I loved Obey Giant, all that stuff. Like not only his style, but just like it was Andre the Giant, which I found hilarious, right? So I really loved him. And then of course, he is a whole empire now, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
Like just
Uh,
the whole culture that evolved around
yeah,
him.
yeah, totally, totally, like a whole culture. I'm glad I got some of his prints when he and knowing who he was. I don't
Oh,
think I would
lucky.
afford him now. Yeah,
Nice.
like I don't think I would afford him now. So uh, yeah, I loved him as a designer and Saul Bass. And yeah, it's just those are probably the two biggest inspirations on me as a designer for sure.
Mm.
I would say.
Now, what motivated you to want to write? Because these are all like visual art forms.
Yeah. So uh I wanted basically it came down to I wanted to make comics. And I knew that if I wanted to be an artist, it would be years of dusting off, that skill set to get up to snuff to be a comic artist. But I guess I don't know. I've always loved to read. I've always had like this imagination of like creating. When I was a kid, I'd make my own comics, and I was writing those stories, creating those characters. Like, well, maybe I can do that now. And I mean, it was a challenge, right? It was a lot of reading, a lot of learning how to tell a story, learning how to write, because I'm not educated as a writer at all. I went to art school, so I have no education as a writer. So it's all um, reading books. A lot of people ask me like, well, how do you learn how to write comics? I think the best thing to do is to read books on screenwriting. There's a lot of good how to write comic books now, but back then there weren't. So I read a lot of screenwriting books, and that really teaches you the basics of story and character, and it's all translatable to comics, all of
Mm.
that. So I would recommend the greatest is called Story by Robert McKee. That is your Bible if you want to be a screenwriter or any kind of
Hmm.
writer. You'll get everything you need from that.
Is it just the beats and being able to be concise? Is that what?
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. And just like the flow of a story, like it's like building scenes and how to turn a scene, what a character desire is, like all that stuff that we all know instinctually just from watching film and TV our whole lives, right? Like we know these things instinctually, but when you read it in a book, it like explains it, right? Where it's like, well, that's why that happens. So that's my piece of advice for anyone that wants to write comics is read a good screenwriting book because that'll teach you everything you need to know.
Nice. Um, do you remember the first comic book that you read?
Oh yeah, 100%. So this is a two-parter if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem.
So as a child, mega Ghostbuster fan. Like that was
Oh
my
wow.
life. Yeah, like Ghostbusters, and then it was like probably Back to the Future was number two, and then Ninja Turtles three, right? So
Okay.
like that late '80s, right?
Nice.
So
Those
I
are fun
love.
times, man.
Yeah, I know it really was really, really. I wish I just looking at prices if I just would have kept all my stuff in the package. Like what they're worth now, it's insane. But anyways,
Like you mentioned Ninja Turtles, and I'm having flashbacks to, you know, all that money I spent on that the arcade game.
oh yeah, yeah. Well, I'm there with you too. So you and me both. It was done so well though. So it was
Yeah.
like, it was so fun. So I was young. I still loved to draw, loved colored pencils. So my parents thought it'd be a good idea to get me a comic book, actually. This is '80s when comics were still massive, for kids. So they took me to a comic book store. I still remember it. And the one comic I picked up was the graphic novel adaptation of the Ghostbusters 2 movie.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah, it was a graphic novel. But it was the Ghostbusters looked like the cartoon. That it was the cartoon characters basically lit like doing out the movie. So that was my first comic book that I read, but I'll be honest, that was more about the Ghostbusters than about the comic medium, right?
Hmm.
Like that was just like another thing for my Ghostbuster hype
Well, but
collection.
but I think that
So
just goes to show you how important tie-ins are
I agree. I
because when I
agree.
was a kid, what got me into comics was the original Battlestar Galactica TV series.
Totally.
And if I didn't, I went to, after watching it and being a fan of the show, there was a 7-Eleven within walking distance to
Mhm.
where I lived, and I was looking at the spinner rack, and the first one that I gravitated toward was the Battlestar Galactica comic book. So
I I agree, man. Especially when like when we were kids, the Marvel and DC characters, they weren't. I mean, of course everyone knew Spider-Man and Hulk and Batman and Superman, but it's just like seeing the movie crossover is what really hit everyone, the audiences. So yeah, that was the first book I read, but the first superhero book, I still remember it clear as day. I was 6 years old. I was at the grocery store with my mom, like hating it because what kid likes going to the grocery store? And we'll walk by the magazine rack, and there was Jim Lee's X-Men one sitting there.
Oh wow.
And it was the Wolverine, Cyclops, Iceman cover. And I was just like, I remember going over there and being like, there's a guy with claws coming out of his hands, another one with lasers coming out of his eyes, and a dude made of ice in the back. What is happening? I don't know. Please, can I have this? And I remember taking it and telling my mom, like, don't buy me
Uh,
lunch. Just get me this instead. You know what I mean? And she's like, don't be ridiculous. You need to eat. But like, thank God she had the cash that time to buy it for me. And so that was like the first book I sought out, and I went home, and then that is like when it clicked, like the obsession clicked at that point. And it was just all X-Men all the time after that. And it's funny because then the animated series came out a few years later, or
yeah.
and then that was, I mean, I'm sure you remember that. Like then the X-Men became a household name with the animated show. Like every kid knew who the X-Men were at that point. And yeah, it was just an awesome time to be an X-Men fan because once that show came out and was popular, like they were everywhere. Like
Yeah,
every
I get the theme song running in my head right now.
yeah, it's the best. Yeah, they just nailed it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a long-winded
No, that's
answer, but
awesome, man.
yeah,
Thanks for
two-parter.
sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was growing up in Milwaukee like? What was 11-year-old Jordan like? And I guess you mentioned Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, and Back to the Future.
Yeah.
What other things were you into at that age?
Yeah, so it was really once the 90s hit, it was really, into comic books. Loved the X-Men, Spider-Man was a close second, and then Image came out. And Image was a little bit more, mature for me because I was still younger at the time, but of course everyone had Spawn, everyone had Youngblood. But in Wisconsin, you're spending like 9 months of the year inside. It's just winter is terrible, so it forced me to do a lot of reading of comics, and then got into Magic the Gathering in the mid 90s. I remember me and my friends were all really into that. So, and then of course, watching any movie or TV show that was age appropriate at the, at the time. So yeah, just basically a lot of entertainment because that's what you need to get you through what we needed to get you through the winters. Because it's just, you're stuck inside. So,
Yeah, I mean, I've growing up, I've been lucky enough to live in all sort of warm
yeah,
tropical environments. But I did spend a couple weeks out of the year when I was working at one of my past jobs, and they would have training in Minnesota, like during the
Mhm,
winter. So
mhm.
you would get to like -25
Yep.
during that week, and I'm like, oh my god, it's so cold over here.
I
How did
know.
they do it?
I know it's crazy. It's like you don't when you grow up in it, you don't realize it. And then my wife, who's from Wisconsin too, you move out to California, you're like, holy crap, we can go for a walk every single day of the year. Like this is the best. It's so great. So yeah, that was just winter. Winter really really forces you to consume entertainment.
hmm Um, could you please describe your perfect cheeseburger?
Oh, the cheeseburger, that's my favorite thing in the
Yeah.
world, cheeseburger, right? So this is
Uh-huh.
this is going to sound audacious, right? But I am a burger, cheese, ketchup, that's it. That's what I will order wherever I go if I have the option because I feel like that's all you need to taste if it's a really good burger or not.
Yeah.
Like that being said, like I love the works on the burger. You know what I mean? Like you
Uh-huh.
put lettuce, onion, all of that on there. If I'm at In and Out, it's going to be a double double with onions
Yep.
and ketchup and the lettuce. That's a perfect burger. The In and
Hmm.
Out double double, right? But I'm happy with just cheese and ketchup, yeah, as
Yep.
well.
It's almost like sometimes when I go for pizza, it's like sometimes a good cheese pizza is just perfect.
I agree. I totally agree. Do they have Fresh Brothers down by you in
I
San
don't think
Diego?
so, but I'll look it up.
Yeah, the Fresh Brothers big in LA, and it's like they have all these great pizzas, and it's like their cheese pizza is just perfect, and it's everyone always goes, "Why are you getting just a cheese?" I'm like, "I don't. It's so good." And then they have it, and they're like, "This is incredible." So
Well, it's
yeah,
because if the base product is good, it's because sometimes a lot of places just hide behind the ingredients.
I agree. I agree, and that's how I feel about burgers.
Yeah.
Like if just like you said, if the base is good, everything else is gonna be great too.
Right. You mentioned In and Out. Obviously, that's a Southern California staple. But are there any other places in LA that you like getting a cheeseburger at?
Um, yeah, I mean, I know this isn't based in LA, but the Shake Shack burger is
Mm.
phenomenal. Like I love a good Shake Shack burger. Um, if it's just straight up burgers, there's this place in Santa Monica called R&D Kitchen,
Hmm.
kind of on the northern part of Santa Monica. Their burger it's unbelievable. I don't know what's in it, but I can tell it's like multiple different types of meat in it. So it's great. So yeah, I'd say R&D Kitchen. And then also there's a place called Father's Office in
I've heard of
LA.
that place. I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they say that's the best burger in LA. And, obviously that just depends on what your tastes are. Right.
Right. Right.
But I will say it is the most unique, I think. I've never had, I mean, first off, it comes on a hoagie bun, like a sub, right?
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, so like a mini sub. It comes on a hoagie, and then it's got arugula. I want to say it's brie cheese or it's one of those cheeses, and
Hmm.
then there's like this caramelized onion jam that they put on it.
Yeah.
It tastes like no burger I've ever had in my life. So yeah, when people would come to visit, we'd always go to Father's office if they like burgers because like I feel like you just have to try it, whether you like it or not. Like you will not have another burger like it. So
Mm.
yeah, if you're in LA, definitely check out Father's office. I would
No,
say
I'll keep
if
that
you
in
like
mind.
burgers. Yeah,
Hopefully, they make their burgers so that you can at least eat everything in one bite. Because I hate those burgers when they make them so stacked.
I agree. Yeah, you could do that. You can do that here. Yeah, where you like have to unhinge your jaw to get a bite. I don't like that either.
I think it's ludicrous when they do that. Like
I know.
especially all these like well-known chefs who try to just make it too fancy.
I agree. That's why I love the Shake Shack burger, right? Like you could just perfect size, just inhale that thing.
Although now that you mentioned about you mentioned Shake Shack, I will say that I've had Shake Shack in New York and I've had Shake Shack here on the West Coast, and I think the Shake Shack in New York ones are better than the ones
Really?
here. Yeah, for some
Okay.
reason I don't know why.
Good to know.
Yeah.
I'll check that out.
What's something new that you recently learned?
That I recently learned. Wow, that's a really good question. I guess I learned how to stain wood. my
Oh
my dad,
wow,
yeah, my
really?
dad my dad is here visiting, helping with a project, and he's a woodworker, so he's really good with wood. And I am not handy at all. I will tell anyone that. Like, you need a comic created from scratch, no problem. You need like a spice rack that's even, not going to happen. I can't do that. I can't even like cut the measure. So, anyways, we had to stain some wood, and he showed me how to do it. I was like, I could handle that at least. So that was a lot of fun doing
Uh,
that.
nice.
So,
What's one thing you hated as a child but love now as an adult?
broccoli, I would say, I would say broccoli. Um, yeah, that's funny. I guess the opposite of that would be cake frosting, right? Like I
Oh
have a sweet
yeah,
tooth and I loved cake frosting as a kid, but now even with my sweet tooth now, I can't eat cake frosting.
it's
Like
just too sweet, man.
it's too much. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. And then on that again, something that I didn't like as a kid that I love now would definitely be key lime pie. So good.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And then just tea in general. I mean, I guess no kid really drinks tea, but like
Yeah.
I love tea now as an
Yeah, I've
adult.
been on a Earl Grey tea kick recently.
Yeah,
So,
English breakfast is my jam. So pretty
okay.
close to that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just so good.
Yeah.
Especially now, like this weather has just been perfect the past couple of
Yeah.
days. It's like perfect tea weather.
I was like, I might have to start wearing a beanie soon.
Yeah, I know. I know. It happened fast too. It was
It's
happened
like
real.
well, your hair is still long, but I used to have long hair. I grew it out during the pandemic, and
Yeah.
I cut it off like in April. And I kind of miss it.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. This is when it shines in the cooler temperatures for
Yeah.
sure.
If a movie was made about your life, what kind of music would be on the soundtrack?
I would say it would be like 80s David Lee Roth, Van Halen, and like probably Ride the Lightning era Metallica, and then maybe Huey Lewis to round it out.
Interesting.
All
Wow.
80s. I'd say it'd be all
Yeah,
80s for
yeah.
sure.
That's an interesting mix right there.
Yeah, I love almost all types of music. Pop country, I not me, but like, hey, to each their own. There's some phenomenal musicians that are in pop country, but I'm more of a rock and roll guy.
Yeah. I grew up actually listening to country music, because my dad was a big fan. But it's mostly like the like Merle Haggard and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
like real, yeah, like I love Johnny Cash and yeah, Willie Nelson. That the
Mhm.
old guys. That stuff's great.
Yep. Um, what word would you use to describe yourself?
Uh I would say optimistic.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
That's actually one of my favorite words.
great.
And I think optimism is like probably one of my superpowers.
I agree. It is a superpower. It has to, like especially when you're chronically ill, like
Hmm.
you have to be optimistic because it just yeah. And like you said, it is a superpower. And it's contagious. I've learned too.
Hmm.
I'm sure you see that a lot. I'm sure you walk into a room and you could just feel the energy change, right? So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yep. What
great.
word do you think other people would use to describe you?
Yeah, it's a good one. Well, I know they'd say tall, right? That's the first thing I hear, especially now in the pandemic world when
Yeah.
I Zoom all the time. I meet someone in person, like, holy crap, you're tall. So I'd say tall, but then yeah, I'd say lighthearted, easygoing. I think easygoing would be the good word there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Um, if you could have a meal with anyone alive now or from history, who would it be with, and where would you eat at?
Wow. Okay. So like I think if it was anyone from history, it would be Jimi Hendrix for
Oh,
sure.
nice. Yeah.
Because uh, I think he was an amazing artist. Like the greatest guitarist of all time. Yes, like everyone knows that, but like he was a great fine artist. He was drawing, painting. Um, if you read his lyrics, he was a great writer. He was just most of his lyrics were like mini sci-fi short stories, right?
Mm,
So like when I look at Hendrix, I look at someone that was an all-around artist that could do everything, and that's just really inspiring to me. So yeah, I would say that. And then maybe if they were living, maybe Jeff Goldblum, right? I mean, how could you not want to meet that guy in person, right?
mm, yep. That's yeah, definitely. Yeah, your Jimi Hendrix pick. The way you describe him reminds me of I don't know if you know who Miyamoto Musashi is.
Yeah.
Yeah, like him. I mean, just think about him. He lived during a time period where it was like life and death. He was a Ronin or a samurai,
Yep.
and he had his first death match at the age of 13. And then, but you read more about him, and you find out that he was also good at painting, sculpting, carving. Um, you know, I think that's one reason why a lot of people read his book, the Book of Five Rings, because you know, from the West's perspective, you know, the pen is mightier than the sword, but
Hmm.
from his perspective, it's pen and sword and a cord. So, that
Mm-hmm.
mentality, I guess, lent a lot to the business world. first in Japan, and I guess traveled to the West. So it's kind of interesting.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. Um, One of your characters in Ripple Effects can teleport. If you could teleport to anywhere in the world right now, where would you go?
Oh, right now?
Yeah.
Oh man, anywhere in the world teleporting right now. I think I would go to Egypt to see the pyramids.
Oh wow,
Um,
yeah, that's a nice
yeah,
pick.
I think it would be awesome. Uh, Awesome to see them, and just traveling sometimes is hard with my health. So, I don't know if I'll ever get there. So if I could teleport there for that, it would be awesome to see in person.
Hmm. If you could tell your younger self, well, let's say your senior high school self, one thing, what would it be?
Um, yeah, it would probably be, don't worry so much in school. Like the art school I went to was like really, really competitive, and Milwaukee is a small market for jobs. So you're really uh, working really hard to go and get a handful of jobs. Against your whole class, really. So yeah, I was just like really stressed out about that. With student loans and everything, and all that. So it worked out. It worked out for everyone. So
Hmm.
I wish I could have told myself to enjoy college a little bit more and not pull as so many all-nighters on typography projects that ultimately wouldn't matter. So I would say that.
um, how did you? What was Los Angeles always your goal?
You know what? The funny thing is, no, right? So my first time coming to California, I just didn't we didn't travel much when I was a kid. So my first time coming to California was actually my honeymoon in
Mm,
San Diego, as a
okay.
matter of fact. So yeah, so
What,
that was
at
my
Comic Con? I was joking.
yeah. I wish, yeah, yeah. That would a real dream. That no. So yeah, so we came to San Diego and we're like, holy cow, this place is awesome. And also the first thing anyone who's never been to California before does is like put on just their bathing suit and run into the Pacific thinking it's going to be warm, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
being ice cold and screaming and coming out, which we totally did.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, so I love San Diego. So did my wife. And then we went to Los Angeles 2 years later for the first time to visit a friend. My wife's best friend was out here for a couple months for work, so we came out and visited her, and it just felt like home. Like we both love Southern California, and that kind of felt like home. But especially for me, LA, just the creativity there, and like the appreciation of the arts that city has.
Hmm.
It's not a perfect city by any means, but coming from the Midwest, right, in a blue collar neighborhood, to coming to LA and Santa Monica is quite a quite a change. But
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
it just has felt like home here since the first time I came. I can't really describe it, other than just, yeah, it feels like I am where I'm supposed to be, and I don't.
Nice.
Yeah,
You have a good community over there in LA too, in terms
yeah,
of comic books.
yeah, totally. And great, great, great shows out here. I mean, all of Southern California, right? It's just there's just great comic shows everywhere, throughout all of SoCal.
Hmm. Definitely. I get spoiled living in San Diego and Comic Con, being here. I take it for granted sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about hotel apocalypse, right?
Right, right.
Uh, I know that's always the most stressful thing of Comic Con is like, am I going to have a hotel? Right? That's just the. But I get it. When was the first year you went to Comic Con growing up?
Oh gosh, I didn't go until after I was already in college, so it was probably like 95.
Wow, so lot different back then, I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
yeah. And the second half of the convention center wasn't even built yet.
Wow. So was it more like what today's WonderCon feels like back then?
Even less.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, my first Comic Con was 2011, and I remember walking right into Hall H on Friday. Like it was a Friday. I
Yeah.
walked right into Hall H.
Yep.
Shari Theron was on stage for Prometheus, and it's like, this is crazy. And it's like, and then it just felt like a year later, that's when all the lines were just started. It's like, so I
It
got that
all.
one taste of Hall H. I haven't been back since. So
Yeah. I guess ever since Twilight came out, that's when it started happening.
yeah, yeah, it's true.
um, what do you hope to accomplish? What do you hope to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years?
I would hope to put out a 3 to 5 years. So I'd say a new comic every year and a half, a new
Mm,
comic story. And
okay.
that doesn't mean maybe it's just a one shot, maybe it's a short story, right? But I would love to keep creating comics. My biggest thought is, how will I ever make anything better than ripple effects? That means more than ripple effects. So I guess that's what I hope to accomplish, figuring that out. Like,
Uh-huh.
can I ever top that? Um, and if it becomes my seminal work, there's nothing else I'd rather have. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Do you? I mean, are you still full time designer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
How do you balance like those two worlds?
Not sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation. Yeah, it's hard, right? It's hard, but I love comics so much that it's just what I have to do, and luckily my coworkers have always been really supportive of my comic work. So taking off a week for Comic Con is no problem, and
Mm,
they're super supportive. So I'd say at the end of the day, having coworkers and clients that support um, what I love to do, which is comics, is really how I'm able to do it. And
mhm.
of course, a wife that is completely 100% supportive
Yep.
too. That's a huge difference.
um, what three TV shows could you watch over and over and not get tired of?
Um, okay, so I would say uh, it's got to be Schitt's Creek is got to be one of those that just
Okay.
makes me laugh that
I've been meaning to
nonstop.
check that one out.
Yeah, they're only like 22 minutes long, so you just rip them off right in a row, and it's
Hmm.
it's a blast. So I would say that. I would say the original Game of Thrones, right? That just feels like every time you watch it, you get something new and better. Um, and then, man, the first 3 seasons of Buffy, like I loved the
Mm,
first 3 seasons of
yeah.
Buffy when I was younger. And actually, during COVID, my wife had never seen any of it, and she got it right. Like she never got it. She's like, "Why is everyone always so obsessed with Buffy when we were younger?" I was like, "Because it was good." And she's like, "No." And then we watched. It's like, okay, yeah, this is actually really fun.
So are you Team Angel or Team Spike?
Angel
Yeah.
for sure, Team Angel. I mean, that's it all starts with him. Such a great character, and Boreanaz was so good too.
Yeah.
So
Even like the spinoff, I enjoyed.
I agree. I agree. They did a spinoff. They did it the right way. I wish that they would have reunited at the end of the Buffy stuff, but
Hmm.
that's okay. Yeah, I'd say.
um, if just imagine it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, you're closing down the your local karaoke joint. What song do you end with?
Jump by Van Halen, hands
Oh,
down.
dude, you're getting
Yeah.
the party all started again.
I know, I know. I was gonna say then it's not. Yeah, it's not closing down at that point.
It's all good. That's a good song, man.
Yeah, you see how I had it ready in the tank too. It was like
Yeah.
no, no, no choice.
And my last question for the Thunder Round is: you mentioned earlier how at comic conventions you go through the comic book bins. What comic books do you normally look for?
So I love anything Marvel from the Silver Age, which is the '60s on, right? There's just like I'm always looking to fill in things. The thing is now the Silver Age, the '60s, and even now uh, the Bronze Age in the '70s, they're getting kind of expensive. Where I used to be able to pull Stanley, Jack Kirby, Fantastic Fours for like $5, $10. They're beat up, but I didn't care, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So now it's like I'm kind of trying to build out the 80s Marvel books because those are still, pretty cheap. Like I just so dumb, but I just built out the full Quasar run, right? Like the biggest superhero from Wisconsin. So I had to build that out from the 90s, Quasar. And it was like $1 an issue. But, the fun is like the treasure hunt of digging through the bins looking for it. So yeah, just no slight against DC at all. It's just I always, as a kid, read Marvel, and I just responded to their characters and their stories more than I did DC. So that's primarily what I collect is Marvel.
Yeah, I sort of feel the same way.
Yeah, and I mean like some of the Batmans, like The Dark Knight Returns, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing and Watchmen. It's like DC has like some of the greatest titles ever, right? And
Hmm.
I love those, but on a whole, yeah, I've just been a true believer, always have, I guess, and yeah, that's what I like to collect.
Yeah, I need a. Do you have room? I mean, where do you store everything?
No, the answer is no. So, storage unit, yeah, it's
Okay.
a storage unit. I mean, half of my stuff from when I was a kid, and up until moving here, is at a storage unit in Wisconsin. So it's like it's very split up, but it's just the fun of it. It's just I look at each con like a treasure hunt. I have my list, and I try to find it and not go broke with price with the
Right, right.
prices these days. So
Yeah, I'm scared to go down that rabbit hole. I mean,
yeah,
I think at the very least, I used to enjoy reading all those Marvel Universe. Those.
totally. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe I'll go back and try to collect those
Those are
again.
yeah, those are still cheap though because I was able to get that run.
Okay.
So yeah, those are still cheap. The 80s stuff, but yeah, I love what I can't resist is it's funny now it's a show, but the What If, the original What If
Oh, yeah,
series.
yeah.
I used to
Those were
love.
fun.
I loved those as a kid, and they're still really cheap. Like even the first run from the 70s,
Hmm.
they're still cheap. So like that's probably the one I'm always upgrading is What If, and of course anything X-Men, and anything Liefeld, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, those are still pretty cheap too, and Silvestri stuff, I love those too.
Mm. Is there a person or group of people that has helped you along the way that you'd like to say thank you to?
Yeah, I get not I guess I well I guess if I had to think one person, it would be Seek Donnelly, who was my first editor on Terminarch on my first comic book, and really, convinced the owner of his publisher that it was worth publishing, and got the owner on board, and was taught me a lot about comics, taught me a lot about how the industry worked, and he introduced me to Barbara and Bryant, right? So
Mm,
that's how I
got
met
it.
I met them. So yeah, Seek Donnelly was a great editor. It taught me a lot, and he gave me my first shot. I mean, I pitched him, I pitched him a comic on the WonderCon floor that I
Oh,
had
wow.
sample art for. I mean, I've been working on it for like 2 years. I'm like, this is going to be awesome. And he's like, oh, it's good, but like, we're looking for sci-fi right now. That's the gap we have. Do you have any sci-fi? And I had this idea in high school, and the idea was the robots come self-aware. Uh, if they were to end humanity, they would save artists because they can't create art. Which that was the idea I had in high school. Now this AI generated stuff is terrifying, right? But like at the time, so he's like, "Do you have any sci-fi?" And I just pitched him that off the cuff, like it was something I was working on. He's like, "That sounds really cool," like blah blah blah, And so I started developing it, and he introduced me to an artist. So yeah, for sure. It would be Seek Donnelly. And he still is active on YouTube. He runs he runs the Venom channel called the Venom Vlog. And
Mm,
he's got a decent amount of followers there. So yeah, he gave me my first break. And yeah, I still owe and appreciate him for that.
nice. Seeing as how you've, you know, had some practice pitching projects, do you sort of have like a best practices on how to pitch?
Yeah, I'd say keep it brief and try to, if you can, distill it into one sentence, right? Even if that one sentence is, it's like Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Ninja Turtles, right? You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like
yeah.
have something that people can relate and imagine in their heads that will help a lot more than you think. Like I said with ripple effects, it's like, well, it's like Superman, but the kryptonite is diabetes, right? Like that sells people at conventions, right? They just get it instantly. So if you could get it to one sentence, that would be great. Um, and then, of course, if you're a writer like myself, you got to have an artist, especially if you're starting out, right? Like publishers are going to want to see the pages. They're going to want to see what it's going to look like. So that would be my biggest suggestion, is having some samples, even if it's not sequential pages, just like character sketches or anything that help. Because with anything, I mean, I'm sure you know this in design, like the more visuals you have going into a pitch to talk about, the better it goes,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
The more you have to show that people can react to, the better.
definitely. Um, is there an artist, writer, or other creative that you'd like our audience to check out?
Um, yeah, I mean, I have been just loving this book. Well, I mean, I'm sure they know it. Night of the Ghoul by Francesco Francavilla and Scott Snyder. It's a
Mm,
horror comic. Scott Snyder wrote Batman for a really long time, and Francavilla is one of my favorite artists. He does a lot of Mondo posters that I love too. So Night of the
nice.
Ghoul, that's out in stores right now. And then I'm just looking at my stack next to me to see what I have. But that's been really really fun. And then there was this book called Wild Ride that came out. The second issue just came out, and it's kind of like an evil Disneyland, and that's been pretty fun to read too. And that's by Skybound.
Cool. And what other in-person events and comic conventions are you planning to be going? Are you planning to attend in the next few months?
Yeah, so I think I will probably be at LA Comic Con on Friday, but I won't be there for Ripple Effects. I'll be there as a fan, so
Hmm.
walking around. I'm sure I'll have copies in my backpack, if I would run to do it. But then next year, I think I'm going to hit the conventions hard. So every SoCal Con for sure, WonderCon,
Yep.
Comic Con, but I think I'll do Emerald City and C2E2 in Chicago next year as well too.
Cool. Is it too soon to maybe talk about any projects that you're working on right now, or is it you want to talk about that later?
Comics wise, yeah, there's clean slate comics wise. So trying to figure that out right now. But um it won't be superhero. I know that. Like I feel like Ripple Effects that's my superhero piece. So maybe I go back to horror, maybe sci-fi. Not sure, but that's what I'm focusing on right now. Well, will be. I should say will be focusing on. I'm not trying to think about it until after the holidays. I need to give myself a little bit of
Yeah,
a break.
definitely. Yeah. On that note, I was going to ask you about this. We usually have a part of the podcast where we talk about closing pieces of advice. Um, a lot of people say write what you know, but you sort of have a different take. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, I think writing what you know, like you said, is a good thing to follow. I guess what I try to think about is like write something that only you could only you could tell, right? And that's actually um, one night they did a Logan screening where I lived in Santa Monica, and Patrick Stewart was there for a Q&A afterwards. It's like one of my greatest memories of living, in LA. And he had this great thing where he said, he's like, there's only one of you in this world. You can do things that no one else can do. So bring that through in your art, because you're special, and we all have something different to bring. So with Ripple Effects, I felt like telling a story about chronically ill superhero was something that only I could do if I focused on my personal experiences and worked that into his story. So that's what I would say, and that is like an extension of write what you know, because you know yourself. So yeah, think about what you can write, and don't stress out about it. Right? Like maybe you're just a really funny person, great at telling jokes. So like working comedy into something that has never really been done before, a medium or a type of story that hasn't been done. But yeah, just think about what you are special and how you can translate that into your work.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure catching up with you. Hopefully, I can see you in person soon. And congratulations and much success to Ripple Effects, and especially with the sort of effect you're having with people that sort of have that are going through that same thing. So it's really having a positive effect.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me on. It was great to catch up, and like you said, I'll look forward to seeing you at WonderCon or in LA if you go. But yeah, for sure, it'll be awesome. It was a blast, as I knew it
Cool.
would be.
Yep. And we'll have to get you on again because I really enjoyed our conversation. What's the best place to get a hold of you on online?
Yeah, just I'm just on Instagram these days, so you can find me at Jordy Jordith. So or at Fanbase Press, they have me tagged and everything too. So
Okay,
if it's
cool.
easier to
Yeah,
to
I'll
go
link to
through
that.
them,
I'll
yeah,
definitely link to that.
yep.
Cool. Well, thank you for listening to the Holly Show podcast, and thanks to my guest, Jordan Hart. Please give him a follow and consider supporting his comic book, Ripple Effects, which will be available as a trade paperback on November 15th, 2022. And it's already available for, I guess, for digital reading. Right, Jordan?
Yes, correct. It's available digitally on Hoopla, which is free with a library card.
Cool. As you know, we love putting the spotlight on independent pop culture creatives like Jordan. If you have a suggestion for a potential guest, please let us know by reaching out to us on social media or by filling out our contact form on our website, hallh.com. If you believe in our mission to be the voice of independent creators, we would appreciate a rating, hopefully 5 stars, and a comment on Apple Podcasts. And please spread the word on social media using the hashtag HallHShow. Peace, cheers, and stay safe out there.